So to further delve into the developing situation in the north of Israel and in a wider region, I would like to welcome Dr. Jacques Neria, former deputy head of assessment in Israel's military intelligence, here with me in the studio, and in Washington. From Washington, joining us, Behnam bin Taleblu, senior fellow at the Foundation for Democracies. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Jacques, you know Lebanon probably better than anyone as a Lebanese born and raised. Looking at what's going on in your former homeland, because now it's totally different, what do you see that we don't?
Well, I see, first of all, voices that are very much critical of what Hezbollah is doing. But it doesn't mean that the Lebanese public is against Hezbollah. There are critics, and we must not think that this is the essence of the Lebanese public. Basically, the Hezbollah is not part of a part in the negotiations concerning the border, and he says it's very, very openly and very clearly. There is no negotiations on the border because the border has been defined in 1923 and has been recognized as an international border between the Great Britain and France at the time, the mandatory powers at the time. So there's no need to discuss nor to negotiate. So what we hear from the American side is that we are fed by an illusion of a so-called agreement or diplomatic solution that we might reach with Lebanon. There's no government in Lebanon. There's a caretaker government in Lebanon. There's a caretaker prime minister. There's no president since October 22. There's nobody that you can sign with, ratify any agreement. So, I mean, we have to face the reality. Hezbollah is there. It will stop firing on Israel if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, but it will not retreat. And this is what, and this equation.
So what you're saying is Israel has to fight. If Israel wants to stand for what it promises to its civilians up north, it has to fight.
Unless there is a deal between the US and Iran. This is something that we cannot ignore, and this is the price that Israel might pay, maybe in the nuclear field, maybe in other fields that we don't know right now. But this is the essence of it. And Iran is the only one that can impose on Hezbollah to retreat or to refrain from attacking Israel.
Yes, Behnam bin Taleblu in Washington. Thank you so much for being with us. How do you assess the situation? Very delicate, one must say, from the other side of the Atlantic. How does it look to you?
Well, I would say it's equally problematic, and I agree with the somewhat kaleidoscopic picture that your guest actually just mentioned, in particular with respect to Israel's varied political versus military options towards the north. I mean, ultimately, if there ever was one element of Iran's acts of resistance that is more even than a proxy, but is really an element, you could say, or an extended element of Iran's security forces, it's Lebanese Hezbollah. And finding a way to get the U.S. a bit more involved to either deter or to force the Lebanese Hezbollah to back down right now, there seems to be zero political appetite in Washington for doing that, especially when all the time and political attention is still being spent on some kind of a ceasefire agreement dealing with Israel South and the crisis in Rafah. So ultimately, while the guest does mention the question of some kind of either U.S.-Iran deal to get Hezbollah to change this, strategic situation where they are, physically more entrenched in, 18 plus years of violating Resolution 1701, notwithstanding, I don't see such a deal in the offing, whether you see that deal in the nuclear domain or even the political domain, or even particularly as it comes to de-escalation and deconfliction in the post-October 7 Middle East. In fact, ironically, the Biden administration is more militarily involved in this region as it wanted to push away from it amid an election year.
I take you back, Behnam, to October 11th, if my memory doesn't mistake me, and to that evening when President Biden spoke openly and said, don't. So Israel and Hezbollah and Iran didn't open a full-scale war, but practically we're fighting ever since, and you see, and both sides are paying a heavy price.
Indeed, the problem with the paradigm of do or don't is that it fundamentally misunderstands the way of war the way of war of Iran, the way of war of Israel, the way of war of Lebanese Hezbollah. These aren't states at the moment, or elements or entities, if you look at Lebanese Hezbollah, fighting conventional open, conflicts. These are states that these are entities that have been adjudicating gray zone conflicts. Israel calls it mowing the grass, or the war between the wars. Iran calls it exporting the revolution, or arming the axis of resistance. In fact, all these three entities in some way have been pre and post October 7, engaging in different kinds of military conflict in the Middle East that may not have met the U.S. threshold for doing or not doing. The problem is the U.S. doesn't have a political strategy to deal with that gray space, to deal with that gray zone conflict. And in general, this is the fruit of not being able to deal with that. You have to simply issue a deterrent threat that you may not end up acting on because your adversary has more resolve, even though you have more capability.
Yes, so back to you, Jacques Neri. You've heard my last question to Mary McAuliffe, our correspondent up north, and I've asked her about the citizens of Israel. What should they anticipate? What should they demand from their government? And when will they be able, we're speaking of something between 60 and 80,000 people, when will they be able to go back home?
Well, as far as I know, out of 80,000 that were sent to hotels, 60,000 have settled in other places. So there are about 20,000 that are left in hotels. And I think that the only thing that you can share with them is blood, sweat, and tears. The possibility of coming back to their homes and their localities in the near future, at least till the late summer, are very slim. And if by then there's no political solution, and maybe the alternative, unlike most of people think, would be a war between Israel and Hezbollah, no. The alternative is to fight against Syria and to make the regime fall there. Because if Syria falls, then the whole puzzle that Iran has put in place would just crumble. And Hezbollah will turn its attention to Syria, and Iran will turn its attention to Syria in order to recover. And this is the main strategy today that we should follow and we should continue. This is the point, the weakest point that is in facing us, and this is the point where we have to strike.
But you look to the enemy, to Syria, to President Assad. I look back to us. You said that the Israeli government should give the citizens a Churchillian speech. You spoke of blood, sweat, and
exactly,
etc. So that's what we need.
Look, I mean, the strategy of Hezbollah is very clear, very clear. It is a war of attrition against Israel, just to weaken Israel and to force Israel to deploy its forces facing the northern part of Israel. It is no coincidence then after the strike on Baalbek, 100 kilometers from the border, Hezbollah didn't strike a target 100 kilometers inside Israel. He chose just to escalate the quantity of missiles and the quality of its missiles on military targets. This is very, very clear in Hezbollah's position. He wants the war of attrition to continue, and if it continues, we have seen already half of all the houses on the border have been destroyed. The whole area has been evacuated, and there is no way that the inhabitants come back there.
Yes, Behlan, back to you. If Israel and Hezbollah go to a full-scale war, can Israel rely on a full-scale assistance from the administration, given the war in Gaza, given the situation in Rafah, given the unrest in relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu? Can Israel count on that?
Well, let's start with the end of your question, about the politics of the situation, the more tense relationship that continues to get more tense based on leaks to the press throughout all of 2024 so far. Despite that tension, there is still significant pressure from Biden's domestic far left flank and more progressive flank about the nature of how well they would say Biden has stood with Israel in the past, several months. So, if past is prologue, then, Biden is certainly likely to stay the course on this. But then again, this is an election year. There are certain elements of the U.S. that would see this as an escalation, even though I would see it as more trying to restore deterrence and, keep Hezbollah from trying to win this war of attrition, which again needs time, not resources, is based on resolve, not interests, as the previous guest was mentioning, in order to win. So while certainly I think in the forefront, helping restore deterrence as something that the Israelis can count on for the Americans, the initiation of a third Lebanon war or a unilateral attempt to enforce 1701 with no diplomatic or political plan is probably not going to be something that's going to go very far in Washington. Something that also may not go very far in Washington, and with immense respect to the guest, is the idea of reigniting a conflict or doing something more than Israel has been doing in Syria, which is the kind of the war between the wars approach. If another option to a third Lebanon war is basically regime change in Syria, I'm sure lots of Americans would be telling the Israelis across all partisan divides. We had 10 years of an opportunity to do that when there was real street and other pressure on the Assad regime. Is it now a bit too little too late?
Good question. I was among those who thought that Israel should have got rid of Assad 10 years ago because he was the biggest butcher of the Middle East because of him killing hundreds of thousands of his citizens, 100
Absolutely.
kilometers from where we sit now. So that
Absolutely. And sorry to interrupt, this is an essential quote for the audience to know. Former Iranian President Rafsanjani, some who people styled a moderate, used to talk about Syria as being part of a chain. When he would talk to his Iraqi counterparts, he would say, the chain from Syria to here cannot be cut. Bad things will happen. Unfortunately, there was an opportunity to cut that chain. I don't see that opportunity today. Instead, you have a land bridge paved over that chain from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon.
Jacques, so Israel needs to cut that chain because the chain might struggle it. We see the ending of the chain on one hand in Yemen and on the other hand in Gaza.
Definitely so. Definitely so. Syria is the springboard from which everything. The evil comes from there. All the weapons come from Iran through Iraq through Syria. Syria allows all those transfers of weapons, all those transfer of technologies to happen. All those missiles that are reconstructed or in Syria itself, and Syria is facilitating the Iranian proxies to act in the Golan. Syria in fact has lost the control of the south of the Golan from Dara to Suwaida and to the Israeli border. The positions of the Iranian militias are 200 meters, less than 200 meters from Israeli positions on the Golan, and Syria is not suffering anything. The regime is being reconsolidated, and it's in fact the perfect ally to Iran. So, and look what's happening between Iran and the U.S. I just mentioned earlier an arrangement between the U.S. and Iran. Suddenly there are no more attacks on on American bases in Iraq. Suddenly there's no American bases attacked in Syria. Why is that?
Why?
Because the American has signified to Iran that if they continue, they would be hit very hard. And this is the message that Iran didn't want to hear, and Iran doesn't want its militias to be defeated. And this is the point. And we have to exploit this situation. We have to signify to Hezbollah that it has to lose a lot. And not only, it's not the first time we are bombing inside Lebanon, but we have to strike at very, very sensitive targets in order for Hezbollah to understand that we mean business.
Jacques Neria here with me in the studio, Bertrand Ben Taleblu in Washington. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us tonight.